Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, zombies. I'm comparing two horror movie novelisations, Dawn of the Dead and Return of the Living Dead. Before I get into the books, I wanted to talk about two things quickly. The first is movie novelisations, and the second is the film Night of the Living Dead, which was really the genesis for these two books. So let's talk about movie novelisations. I absolutely love movie novelisations, and I always have. As a teenager, and even before I was a teenager, I read tons of movie novelisations. And partly that was because I was fascinated with the idea of films, particularly the kind of big movies that everyone was talking about, but I just wasn't able to see them. My family didn't have a video recorder, and this was back in the days when, you know, the only way to see films was if they happened to be on at your local cinema. So Star Wars, for example, I read probably 2 or 3 times, read the novelisation of by Alan Dean Foster before I actually got to see the film. And the same was true for many, many horror films. So, you know, growing up, my parents were reasonably strict about what I was allowed to watch, but far less strict about what I was allowed to read. And so films like Alien and The Thing, which I wasn't allowed as a, kind of 11, 12-year-old to watch, I was allowed to read the novelisations of, and I read them and loved them. So those films I kind of knew inside out before I actually got to see them. And movie novelisations are something really that has died out, and I'm not sure why that is. I suspect part of it is because of the fact that movies are so much more available nowadays. So there aren't people like me who really want to experience the story of a movie but can't. Everyone can get access to the films either, physically on DVD or Blu-ray, or they can stream them. So it's much easier nowadays to see movies. The other reason, I think, is that publishers have got a bit more snooty and are less willing to publish stuff that looks like trash. And movie novelisations look like trash. They are clearly there to cash in on the success of the film, which doesn't mean they're bad books, but it does mean, I think, that publishers are less interested in doing them. That said, there has been an uptick recently in the number of movie novelisations published, particularly by smaller independent publishers. A lot of people are getting really interested in the concept of novelisations of older films in particular, and there's been a spate of novelisations of trashy old B movies and things like that, which I think is fantastic. I love seeing some of these novelisations coming out nowadays, and even newer films are starting to get novelisations. So V. Castro did a novelisation for the Zack Snyder Netflix film Rebel Moon, and Tim Wagner did an excellent novelisation of the movie Terrifier 2. So they are starting to come back a bit, but they're certainly nowhere near as prevalent as they were when I was a kid, when it felt like pretty much every movie got a novelisation. And even better, when you bought them and opened them up, there would be kind of 8 pages of full colour photos from the film in the middle of the book. The novelisations that come out nowadays, you definitely don't get that. Publishers are definitely looking to decrease their costs.
Johnny!
You're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're acting like a child.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
So let's move on to Night of the Living Dead. An incredible film, a truly excellent zombie film. A really, really graphic, shockingly graphic for the time zombie film, and a very bleak and dark film as well. It's a film I absolutely love, and a film that many people consider to be something that was kind of shaped modern horror cinema. Kim Newman, the film critic and novelist, when he wrote his book Nightmare Movies, talking about modern horror cinema, he started that book in 1968 with Night of the Living Dead. It really was a tremendously successful and important film. It was made on a shoestring, so it was made for about $100,000, and it made over $30 million at the box office, both in the States and internationally. So phenomenally successful. And as I say, a really, really great film. The name clearly that is most often associated with that film is George Romero, the director, who went on to have an extremely successful career in horror cinema and made many, many more great movies. But he didn't write the screenplay single-handedly. He co-wrote the screenplay with John Russo. and it was actually John Russo who came up with the idea of making a zombie movie originally. Now, John Russo also went on to have a career as a film director, but was not nearly as successful as Romero. He did write and direct a few films, but mostly he wrote books. He wrote dozens of horror novels, and that brings us to the books. So what we have here are 2 novelisations of the sequel to Night of the Living Dead. So the famous sequel to Night of the Living Dead is clearly Dawn of the Dead, Romero's late 70s film, which is absolutely fantastic. A really bold and ambitious take on the zombie genre, and probably many people's favourite zombie film. It's not mine. I personally prefer the sequel to this, Day of the Dead, but Dawn of the Dead is, definitely an excellent film. But John Russo also wrote a sequel to Night of the Living Dead called Return of the Living Dead. Now, there is a movie called Return of the Living Dead that came out in 1985, I think, but that is not this. So Russo at the time, so in the late 70s, around the same time that Dawn of the Dead came out, Russo had written this script and tried to get it, tried to get finance to make it into a movie, and wasn't able to. So instead, he turned it into a book. So he novelised his unfilmed screenplay. He was, however, involved in ongoing discussions with producers about making a Return of the Living Dead film, and the film that came out in the mid-80s, which was written by Dan O'Bannon, was at least in part based on a story, I think, by Russo. So this Return of the Living Dead is very different from the movie Return of the Living Dead. So, 2 different novelisations. I really enjoyed both of them, but they are very different from each other. Dawn of the Dead is more of a kind of a reasonably pedestrian novelisation. It doesn't do anything particularly brave with its subject matter. It's a fairly straight, fairly flat novelisation of the movie. Now, clearly, if you like the film, you're probably going to enjoy the book. It's a fun read. It's really, really tense. It's quite graphic at times, and it does a fairly good job of capturing the mood of the film. If you don't know, you probably do, but if you don't know, this film is largely set in a shopping mall. So some people who are, fleeing the zombie plague manage to get into a shopping mall and kind of make it a safe haven for themselves, defeating the zombies that are in there already and kind of fortifying it. So it's a film that has a lot of interesting things to say about consumerism and things like that, and that doesn't really come over in the book. The thing that Romero did brilliantly in this film is put messages across. He does this in Night of the Living Dead as well. Is put messages across just with visuals, without having kind of heavy-handed dialogue to drum the message home. So everyone who's seen Dawn of the Dead will remember, images of zombies like wandering around the shopping mall, half remembering what their lives were like, and how it's very easy to draw parallels between, zombies shuffling around a shopping mall and, consumers shuffling around a shopping mall. But Romero does all of that just with visuals. He doesn't drum it home with the dialogue. So in this book, it just doesn't really come over in the same way, that kind of level of satire. And the gore in Dawn of the Dead, which is, fantastically inventive and fun and kind of slightly cartoonish at times, again, doesn't come over quite as well in the book. But it's still an interesting read. Return of the Living Dead then is very, very different. It feels more like a straight sequel to Night of the Living Dead. It also feels like it would have been much cheaper to film than Dawn of the Dead. So Dawn of the Dead is quite bold and ambitious in its scope. Return of the Living Dead is much, much simpler. It's got various people running around in the countryside and small towns trying to escape from the zombies. There's a couple of guys who are absolutely awful, who reminded me a bit of the villains in Wes Craven's film Last House on the Left. So, really nasty guys who are going around attacking people and using the zombie panic as kind of a cover to do that. And they disguise themselves as state troopers to give them access to victims, basically. So it's kind of a nastier book than Dawn of the Dead. It's got quite a grimy, unpleasant vibe to it. But it's also got an interestingly different take on zombies. One of the things that's really interesting about this book is I don't think the word zombies is hardly used at all. Russo uses words like flesh eaters and ghouls and things like that. He doesn't really use the Z word. He may not use it at all. I'd have to look through and check that. But yeah, it's got this kind of grimy feel to it, but it introduces new kind of concepts for zombie lore, which I thought were quite interesting, like the idea that people carry around like stakes with them and hammers, and if somebody they know dies, they immediately like stake them through the brain basically, so they won't come back as zombies. So it's that kind of thing, which I don't remember seeing in other films. I thought was really interesting, and this book is it's fast paced, it's gritty, it's fun. It's definitely got a very 70s vibe to it, but a very different 70s vibe than Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead feels kind of slightly counterculture-y, doesn't it, in a way? It's got that like critique of American society. Whereas this feels more like kind of a 70s grindhouse movie. So both definitely have their merits. I think both are worth reading if you're a fan of zombies. And this new edition of Return of the Living Dead from Fathom Press is absolutely wonderful, really well done, with a nice introduction by John Russo as well, which talks about how he came to novelise the book. So yeah, if you're a zombie fan, both are worth reading, but neither, I have to say, are fantastic. So there you have it, some fairly rambling thoughts from me on 2 sequels to Night of the Living Dead. Do let me know your favourite zombie movie in the comments, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there, hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.